My stepdaughter called me the dumb dad when I attended her baby christening in front of everyone. She said I was the family's unwanted ATM, and everyone laughed. What happened next was rather unexpected. I will tell you everything. First, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Roy Foden from New York. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. I never planned on becoming anyone's dad. Least of all, a dumb one. I was 42 when I met Carla. Charming, kind, a bit weary from life's punches, but strong in that way women become when they've raised 2 kids on their own. We met at a wine tasting I'd gone to on a dare, and I remember thinking she laughed like someone who'd learned to find joy through pain. That laugh pulled me in. She wasn't flashy or clingy. She asked about my work, construction estimating, not the most glamorous thing in the world, and didn't flinch when I told her I'd never been married. She said, "That just means you waited for the right kind of crazy." I should have taken that as a warning. At first, the idea of being a stepfather didn't scare me. Her girls, Taylor and Mariah, were both in their 20s, and I figured they didn't need raising. I wasn't stepping into the shoes of a father. I was just hoping to be a steady presence, someone they could rely on. I was fine being in the background, doing the things good men do when they love someone. Show up, lend a hand, pay the damn bills. And I paid a lot of them. Taylor needed help with community college. Mariah wanted to study nursing but had bad credit and couldn't get a loan. I co-signed. Carla never asked directly, but the girls always had a way of sighing loud enough for me to hear. And I was stupid enough to think that maybe, over time, they'd come to appreciate me, not as a dad, but as someone who chose them. It didn't happen. Not once in the 6 years Carla and I were married did either of them call me for advice or say thank you without being prompted. I was always Carla's husband. I stopped expecting birthday cards or even a return text. Still, I showed up for graduations, hospital scares, broken cars, broken hearts. I wrote checks like love notes, believing that being there, quietly and consistently, would speak louder than blood ties ever could. When Mariah announced she was pregnant, Carla was overjoyed. She cried real tears, already picturing herself knitting booties and planning baby showers. I stood beside her, smiling for her sake, but inside I felt something cold settle. I knew what was coming. I'd seen it before, the whirlwind of expectation, the quiet sideline where I'd be expected to stand. But Carla begged me to be part of it. "Your family," she insisted. "Mariah knows how much you've helped. She respects you." I wanted to believe that. So when the christening invitation came in the mail, I told myself it was a turning point. Maybe this was my moment to step into the light, not as a father, but as a grandfather figure, someone they might finally acknowledge. I spent weeks preparing the gift. I didn't want to hand over a stuffed bear or a silver rattle like everyone else. I wanted to give something meaningful. So I met with my financial advisor, opened a custodial investment account in the baby's name, and seeded it with $10,000. It was money I'd set aside for a vacation I never took, but this felt worth it. I imagined handing over the envelope and seeing Mariah's face soften, her eyes fill with something close to gratitude. Maybe it was naive, but I still believed that generosity could change hearts. The day of the christening was warm, too warm for my pressed shirt and tie. The ceremony was held at a small church downtown, all white walls and polished wood pews. Carla was buzzing with excitement, snapping pictures, introducing me to cousins I'd never met. But even then, I noticed the signs. My name wasn't on the program. The seating chart placed me 2 rows behind the rest of the immediate family. When the pastor thanked Mariah's family for their unwavering support, I saw her glance at her biological father and smile. He was late, of course, sauntering in halfway through with his shirt untucked and a cigarette tucked behind his ear. But when he entered, the room lit up like a damn sitcom reunion. They called him Pops. I was just, "Hey, man." Still, I stayed. I sat through the prayers, the singing, the awkward photo ops. When it was over, we drove to the reception hall, some rented space above a banquet restaurant. I held the envelope in my suit pocket, rubbing the edge with my thumb like a worry stone. Carla was glowing, introducing the baby to every second cousin and neighbor. I kept to the edges of the room, sipping punch, waiting for the right moment to hand over the gift. And then came the speech. Mariah stood up, holding a glass of something sparkling, and tapped the side with a fork. The room quieted, people turning in their seats, smiling expectantly. She looked radiant in her white dress, the baby on her hip. She thanked her mother, her sister, and then pointed to her biological father, the man who's always been there for me, even when times were tough. The crowd clapped. Then she turned to me. And of course, she said, grinning, we can't forget our family ATM. Laughter. Loud, open mouth, wine glass clinking laughter. Seriously, she continued, every family needs a dumb dad who thinks money equals love. Thanks for funding our chaos, Carl. Couldn't have done it without you. My ears rang. The room swam. I looked at Carla, expecting her to look horrified, to say something, to correct her daughter, but she was laughing too. Maybe not as loudly, but enough. I stood. No one noticed at first. I walked to the gift table, picked up the envelope, slipped it back into my jacket. Then I turned and left. No words. No scenes. Just the sound of laughter fading behind me as I stepped into the stairwell, where the only thing echoing was the thump of my own heartbeat. That day, I stopped being the ATM. That day, I stopped being dumb. I didn't drive straight home after I left the christening. I just kept going. Past the exit for our neighborhood, past the grocery store I'd shopped at every Sunday for 6 years, past the turnoff where I once taught Taylor how to merge into traffic. I kept going until the city gave way to open fields and the music on the radio turned static. It wasn't about finding somewhere to go. It was about making space for the anger to settle before it turned into something uglier than silence. I didn't want to lash out. I didn't want to yell. I just needed to let the weight of that moment, the insult, the laughter, the betrayal, sink deep enough for me to understand it. And as I sat on the side of a rural road, engine idling, staring at nothing, I realized something brutal and clarifying. I had been auditioning for a role no one wanted me in. Looking back, the signs had been there for years. Little things, small slights that I brushed off because I wanted peace more than pride. When Taylor moved back home after her divorce and left dirty dishes piled in the sink for days, I said nothing and just cleaned them. When Mariah borrowed my truck without asking and dented the bumper, Carla begged me not to make it a big deal. I paid for the repair myself. Every time I tried to draw a line, I was told I was being dramatic, difficult, controlling. So I softened. I let things slide. I kept telling myself that this was the price of family. That eventually, they'd see me not as the man married to their mother, but as someone who belonged. But belonging isn't something you can buy. And no matter how many holidays I hosted or bills I paid, I never crossed that invisible line. I was tolerated, not accepted. Needed, but never appreciated. The christening had only made public what I'd feared in private. They saw me as a resource, not a person. A man too quiet to fight back, too generous to walk away. Well, they were half right. I had been too generous. But I wasn't going to be quiet anymore. The next morning, Carla found me in the guest room. I'd slept there, not to make a point, but because I couldn't share a bed with someone who'd laughed at my humiliation. She hovered in the doorway, unsure of whether to knock or walk in. "Can we talk?" she asked, voice low, almost rehearsed. I looked up from my suitcase, half packed with clothes and toiletries, and said nothing. "I think you misunderstood what Mariah said," she offered. "It was just a joke. You know how she is." I didn't answer. I folded a pair of socks with care I didn't feel. She didn't mean it to come out like that. "And we were drinking. Everyone was a little. Did you laugh because you thought it was funny?" I asked, cutting her off. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to make her flinch. She opened her mouth, then closed it. "Finally," she said, "I didn't want to embarrass her in front of everyone. But you were fine letting me be the punchline." That stopped her. Her arms folded across her chest like armor. "You're overreacting. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You always make things bigger than they are." "No," I said, zipping the suitcase closed. "You just always make me smaller than I am." I didn't leave that day. I wasn't ready. But something shifted. I moved back into the master bedroom, but we didn't speak for days. The silence wasn't angry. It was hollow, like the aftermath of a storm that flattened everything in its path. I stopped answering the girls' texts. I ignored their calls. Carla gave me space at first, assuming I'd cool off. But I wasn't cooling. I was waking up. I started noticing how often I was expected to fix things. Taylor's rent was short again. Did I want to help out? Mariah had baby formula expenses. Could I chip in just this once? All their requests came with sweeteners. You're always so good with this stuff. We're so lucky to have someone like you. It was always flattery wrapped around a favor. And for years, I fell for it. But now, every request felt like an insult dressed in sugar. And I'd lost my appetite. 2 weeks after the christening, Carla brought home a framed photo from the event. For the mantle, she said, setting it beside the family pictures. I stared at it. The baby in her white dress, Mariah beaming, Taylor to her left, Carla behind them. And in the back corner, almost out of frame, was me. My expression was flat, my hands tucked into my pockets like I was holding myself in place. I hadn't even realized someone took that photo. But there it was, proof of my place in the family, present, but peripheral. That night, I pulled down the photo, placed it in the drawer, and told Carla I didn't want to pretend anymore. She looked at me like I'd slapped her. You're acting like we all hate you, she said. That's not true. No, I replied. You just don't see me. And that might be worse. She tried to argue, but I was done debating my worth. I didn't need their validation anymore. I didn't need to be invited, thanked, or loved by people who only remembered me when something broke or a bill came due. I had spent years investing in a family that never considered me part of the portfolio. And now, I was cashing out. By the end of that month, I had started moving my things into storage. Carla cried when she saw the empty dresser drawers, said she didn't understand what I was doing. I didn't explain. I just looked her in the eye and said, you'll understand one day. Maybe when you need me and I don't answer. I should have known something was off from the minute I walked into that reception hall. It smelled like cheap champagne and overcooked chicken, and someone had strung up a banner that read "Baby Blessings" in glittery gold letters that were already starting to droop at the corners. The room buzzed with chatter, clinking glasses, laughter echoing off tiled floors. Carla floated through it all like a debutante, hugging people, dabbing tears, collecting compliments like flowers in a basket. I stood by the entrance for a full 5 minutes before anyone noticed me. And when they did, it was a half-hearted nod from one of Mariah's cousins, followed by a whisper behind a hand that I knew wasn't kind. I wasn't part of the celebration. I was the guy who showed up out of obligation. The wallet in the room. The outsider who somehow kept being invited back because he never made a scene, until now. The gift table sat near the stage, covered in pastel wrapping paper and stuffed animals. I'd tucked the envelope inside a white box and tied it with a satin ribbon. Not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I still believed in doing things with care, even if no one noticed. I stood in front of it for a long moment before I placed the box down, like laying an offering at an altar that didn't want me. Then I stepped back into the crowd, invisible as always. I poured myself a drink and waited. For what? I didn't know. Maybe for someone to say thank you. Maybe for Carla to pull me aside and tell me she was proud of me. Maybe for a single person to acknowledge that I'd given more than I ever got back. But nothing came. Then Mariah tapped her glass. The room quieted instantly. She stood at the center like she'd been waiting all day for this moment. Her white dress hugged her frame. Her makeup was flawless, and the baby squirmed in her arms like a prop. She cleared her throat, eyes shining, and launched into her speech with practiced ease. Thank you all for coming, she began. This little one is so lucky to be surrounded by love. I want to thank my mom for being my rock, my sister for always having my back, and she paused, letting her eyes fall on her biological father, my real dad, who's been there since day one. The crowd cheered. I sipped my drink. And of course, she continued, shifting her tone, we can't forget the family ATM. I blinked. I wasn't sure I'd heard right. She smiled, the kind of smile that was meant to be cute but cut like a blade. Y'all know who I mean. The dumb dad who keeps writing checks like it's gonna make him part of the family. There it was. Plain and raw. A joke in front of 70 people. My stomach twisted. I felt the blood rush to my face. Not in anger yet, but in that crushing wave of humiliation that leaves you breathless. I scanned the room, hoping, begging, that someone would step in. Carla, Taylor, anyone. But instead, I saw shoulders shaking with laughter. Even Carla was smiling, her hand over her mouth like she was embarrassed, but not enough to stop it. Thanks for all the help, Carl, Mariah finished, raising her glass in mock salute. We couldn't have done it without you. More laughter. Applause. I set my drink down. My hands were trembling, and not from age or nerves. It was something deeper, something that had been building for years, buried under every smile I'd forced, every favor I'd done without complaint. I walked toward the gift table, my footsteps quiet against the floor. Nobody noticed me at first. They were too busy clapping. When I reached the table, I picked up the white box, the one with the $10,000 account that was supposed to set her baby up for a future she didn't deserve. I slipped it back under my arm and turned toward the exit. That's when the whispers started. Is he leaving? Where's he going with that box? Wait, was that the ATM? I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I walked out the door, down the stairwell, and into the parking lot. The air was thick and humid, clinging to my skin like sweat. I got in the truck and sat there for a long time, the envelope heavy on the seat beside me. My phone buzzed once, then again. Carla. I let it ring. Then came a text. Where did you go? That was unnecessary. Unnecessary. That word burned hotter than the insult itself. I had just been mocked in front of her entire family, reduced to a walking paycheck, and my absence was the problem. Not the joke. Not the betrayal. Not the fact that the man she claimed to love had just been humiliated by the daughter he helped raise. I stared at the message for a long minute before deleting it without replying. Later that night, I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spinning in slow circles. Carla came home hours after me. She didn't say a word when she walked in. Just kicked off her shoes, pulled back the covers, and turned away from me. I almost laughed. After everything, I was the one giving the silent treatment. But that night, I didn't say a word either, because something in me had died in that reception hall. Something I couldn't name. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the last thread of patience I had left. But whatever it wasn't coming back. And I knew then that this wasn't just about a joke. It was about every moment that led to it. Every time I'd been pushed to the edges. Every time I'd been told, it's not that serious, or they don't mean it like that. It was about being used, dismissed, and expected to smile through it all. That christening wasn't my breaking point. It was just the moment I stopped pretending. From that day on, I made a promise to myself. I would never again pay to be part of a family that made me feel like a stranger. The first few days after the christening were oddly quiet. Not peaceful, just quiet in that heavy, waiting way, like the air before a storm breaks. Carla didn't say much, and neither did I. She still moved around the house like everything was normal, folding laundry, humming while she cooked, tapping her phone screen like she wasn't expecting the ground beneath her to shift. But I could feel her watching me out of the corner of her eye, waiting for me to break the silence. I didn't. I wasn't punishing her. I was protecting myself. I was too raw to speak without bleeding, and I'd spent too many years pretending I wasn't hurt just to keep the peace. This time, I let the silence speak for me, and it said, I'm done. 3 days passed before I got the first message from Mariah. A group text, sent to me and Carla both. Hey, hope you're not still mad. The christening was amazing. So many people said it was the best one they'd been to. No apology. Not even a flicker of acknowledgement about what she'd said. Just a cheerful recap, like I hadn't walked out with her baby's future in my pocket. Carla replied with heart emojis. I didn't respond. That night, Carla finally broke the silence. She didn't mean anything by it, Carl. It was a dumb joke. She's young. She's 26, I said flatly. Old enough to be a mother. Old enough to know better. She was nervous. She was trying to be funny. Funny is calling me a bad dancer. Funny is teasing me for always falling asleep during movies. Not calling me the dumb dad in front of a room full of people and mocking me for supporting her. Carla crossed her arms and sighed. You're taking it too personally. I laughed then. Not because anything was funny, but because it was absurd how predictable it had become. Every time they crossed a line, I was told I was too sensitive, that I had misunderstood, that I needed to forgive, move on, rise above. I was always expected to be the bigger person, mostly because it was easier than asking them to grow up. I looked her in the eye and said, you know what's funny? You're more upset that I walked out than you were about what she said." She didn't answer. Instead, the next morning, Taylor called. "I heard about what happened," she said casually, like she was talking about spilled milk. "You really walked out with the gift? Damn, that's kinda savage." "It wasn't a gift anymore," I said. "It was an investment in a relationship that doesn't exist." Mariah was just playing. "Don't be so stiff." There it was again, that same tone. The casual dismissal, the refusal to engage with the reality of what had happened. I realized in that moment that they'd all taken my silence over the years as permission. Every check I wrote, every repair I funded, every extra shift I took to cover their messes, they'd interpreted it as passivity, not generosity. And now that I was withdrawing, they were panicking, not because they cared about me, but because their safety net was unraveling. So I made it simple. I didn't call them. I didn't text. I didn't ask how the baby was doing. I didn't offer to stop by. When Carla tried to bring them up, I said, "Not interested." When she pressed, I left the room. That silence became my boundary. Not dramatic, not cruel, just a line in the sand I was no longer willing to let them step over. A week later, Mariah sent another message. This one wasn't so cheerful. "I heard you're mad because I made a joke. I didn't think you were that sensitive. If it means that much to you, sorry or whatever. But I need the info on that account. For the baby, don't punish her just because your feelings are hurt." I stared at the screen, reading those words over and over. Sorry or whatever. That was the best she could offer. And then she went right back to asking for the money. No remorse. No reflection. Just entitlement, wrapped in a faux apology. I didn't respond. I archived the conversation. Then I blocked her number. That same day, I moved half of my savings into a new account, one she didn't have a name of. I called my bank, changed security settings, updated passwords. It felt petty, maybe, but it also felt like reclaiming something. My dignity, my control, my right to say no. Carla noticed. She wasn't stupid. She saw the shift in my routines, the absence of noise. One night, after dinner, she asked, "Is this it then? You're just going to cut them off?" "I'm cutting myself off," I said, "from being used. From pretending I'm part of something that never included me." She leaned back in her chair, staring at me. "They love you, Carl. They just don't always show it the right way." "No," I said. "They love what I do for them. That's different." Silence again. A long one this time. She didn't argue, and that said more than anything she could have come up with. She knew I was right. She just didn't know how to live with it. And maybe that was the hardest part, realizing that even Carla, the woman I'd bent myself for, had grown comfortable with the idea of me being silent and giving. She wasn't malicious. She didn't mean to hurt me, but she had allowed it. She'd watched it happen and told herself I was strong enough to take it. And now that I wasn't playing along, she didn't know who I was anymore. But I knew. For the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was. I was a man who had reached his limit. A man who would no longer confuse giving with belonging. A man who finally understood that silence, when used with intention, is not weakness. It is power. It is clarity. It is peace. And I wasn't giving that up for anyone, not anymore. The house got quieter after that. Not just in sound, but in presence. Carla moved differently, like someone who was constantly trying to walk through a room without setting off an alarm. She no longer tossed her purse on the table when she came in or sang softly while making coffee in the mornings. Everything about her was careful, measured. She didn't ask about Mariah or Taylor anymore. Not directly. She knew better by then. I think she was waiting for me to get tired of the silence, to snap back into the man who used to show up with his wallet wide open and his mouth shut. But that man was gone, and all that was left was someone she didn't know how to love without asking for something in return. I stayed under the same roof for another month. Not because I hoped things would get better, but because I wanted to watch them unfold without me. I wanted to see what happened when I wasn't the one sweeping up the mess. And, sure enough, the mess came quickly. Taylor called Carla 3 times in 1 week, crying about how her hours got cut at work and she didn't know how she was going to make rent. Normally, that would have meant Carla coming to me with a quiet, guilty expression, asking if we could help just this once. But this time, I beat her to it. "She's an adult," I said as she hung up the phone, her eyes already scanning mine for signs of softness. She needs to solve adult problems. Carla nodded, but her silence was tight, bitter. She didn't say it, but I knew what she was thinking. You never had a problem helping before. And she was right. I didn't. I had made it easy for them. I had solved everything without making them feel the cost. That's the problem with generosity. It can become a trap if no one respects it. And they never did. They saw it as a faucet that never ran dry. But now that it had, they weren't thirsty for connection. Just angry that the well had stopped flowing. Then came Mariah again. She didn't call me, she knew better. But she called Carla, and this time, she was less friendly. Tell him he can't just walk away from the baby's future, she'd said, according to Carla. That money wasn't his to take back. I laughed when Carla told me that. It was mine, until I changed my mind. She's scared, Carla said quietly. She's overwhelmed. You could at least. No, I said, not raising my voice but cutting her off with finality. I could, but I won't. She needs to feel what it's like to lose something real. Because she didn't just mock me. She spat on everything I ever gave her. And if she doesn't learn now, she never will. Carla didn't respond. She just looked away. And I realized something in that moment. She still believed they were going to turn around. That they'd apologize, show up, explain themselves. But I'd stopped waiting for that. I'd stopped hoping. And strangely, that gave me peace. A week later, I started sleeping at the condo I'd kept downtown. It was meant to be a rental property, but now it felt like a sanctuary. Small, quiet, no memories etched into the walls. No photos of family vacations, no shelves full of other people's trophies. Just space. Mine. I left Carla a note the first night I didn't come home. Nothing dramatic, just enough to say I needed air. She didn't respond right away, but 2 days later, she showed up unannounced, standing in my kitchen like she didn't know whether to hug me or yell. Are you really doing this? She asked. I already did. She sat down at the counter, her hands trembling slightly. You're just walking away? From me? From all of it? I'm walking away from being hurt by people who don't care if they hurt me. You said you loved us. I did. I still do. But love isn't supposed to feel like this. That broke something in her. She leaned over, covered her face, and started to cry, not loud, not performative. Just soft, tired weeping, the kind that comes when a truth finally lands. I watched her for a while, and for the first time in weeks, I felt sorrow instead of anger. But I didn't move toward her. I didn't try to fix it. I let her cry, and when she was done, she stood up, wiped her eyes, and left. I didn't hear from her for a while after that. Not a text. Not a call. The silence stretched, not as a punishment, but as a consequence. She had built her life around my reliability, and now she had to figure out who she was without it. And I had to do the same. In the weeks that followed, I started living again, not loudly, but honestly. I went for walks in the early morning, bought fresh groceries for one, listened to old records I hadn't touched in years. I read books without distraction. I sat with my thoughts without feeling like I needed to explain them to anyone. And slowly, the resentment began to peel away, like a scab that had protected something deeper underneath. One night, I got a call from an unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. It was Taylor. Her voice was strained, clipped. Mom says you're not talking to anyone. I don't know what you're trying to prove, but we get it. You're mad. Fine. Just, don't make this permanent, okay? I deleted the message. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared enough about myself not to reopen a wound that hadn't healed. They were learning who they were without me, and I was learning who I was without them. And the truth was, we were all better off in the discomfort. Because that's where growth starts. In silence. In consequence. In the space where people have to sit with who they've become and decide if that's who they want to be. It's strange, the things you notice when you stop waiting to be needed. The mornings feel longer somehow. Not rushed, not heavy, just still. I'd wake up in my new place and let the quiet stretch across the room like a blanket. No buzzing phones, no half-shouted conversations from the other room, no one asking where the spare keys were or if I could front someone gas money until Friday. Just me, a strong cup of coffee, and the sound of birds reminding me that life goes on, whether or not anyone bothers to say thank you. I had spent so many years measuring my value by what I could provide. I was useful, dependable, a man who could be called in a crisis, a man who could patch drywall, balance checkbooks, and drive an hour out of his way just to jumpstart a dead car battery for someone who wouldn't remember his birthday. I did all of it because I thought that's what love looked like, showing up, even when they didn't. But now, alone in my condo with nothing but time and space, I began to ask myself a question I had ignored for too long. What did I ever get in return? That question haunted me, not because I expected grand gestures or lifelong loyalty, but because the answer was so stark in its absence. I didn't get affection. I didn't get respect. I didn't even get acknowledgement. Just expectations. And when I finally stopped giving, the truth came roaring in. They weren't disappointed because they missed me. They were angry because their free ride had ended. I had been a human resource, an unpaid subscription. And when I canceled, they realized they'd never even said thank you. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after I moved out, Carla texted to say she was coming by. She didn't ask, just told me. That used to irritate me, that assumption. But this time, I let it happen. I was ready. She arrived with a bag of my clothes I'd forgotten, old t-shirts, socks, a watch I thought I'd lost. She handed them over without looking me in the eye and stood by the doorway like she wasn't sure if she wanted to come in or bolt for the stairs. "Place looks good," she said, voice small. "It's quiet," I replied. She nodded. "Too quiet for me." We stood there for a beat, the weight of everything unsaid pressing in. Then she finally asked, "Is this really how it ends?" I didn't answer right away. I walked to the kitchen, poured her a glass of water, and set it on the counter. She didn't drink it, just stared at it like it held all the answers. "I loved you," I said finally. "Still do, in some quiet way. But I can't go back to that house. Not when I know what it cost me." "They miss you," she said, and I laughed, not bitterly, but softly, like someone recalling an old lie. "No, they miss what I did for them. They miss having someone they could count on without ever giving anything back." That's not love. That's dependency. Carla sat down then, shoulders sagging like the words had knocked the wind out of her. "I didn't mean to let it get like this." "I know," I said. "But you did. And you didn't stop it when you had the chance." We talked for a while longer, about the weather, about mutual friends, about how the baby was doing. Mariah hadn't reached out again, apparently convinced that ignoring me would shame me into returning. Taylor was still struggling with rent. None of them had apologized. Not really. Not sincerely. And Carla, despite her tears and regret, hadn't drawn a single boundary with them. She kept trying to be the bridge when the truth was, the road had already collapsed. When she left, I didn't walk her to the door. I stayed seated, calm and certain, and she closed it quietly behind her. That night, I stood on my balcony and watched the street below. People moving about their lives, arguing, laughing, pushing strollers, walking dogs. Life, as messy and beautiful as ever. And I realized that for the first time in a long while, I wasn't waiting for anything. Not a call. Not a thank you. Not even an apology. I didn't need it. I'd found something better. Distance. Distance gave me perspective. It let me see the years not as wasted, but as lessons. I had learned what happens when love isn't mutual, when generosity goes unappreciated, when silence is mistaken for consent. I had learned what it felt like to be erased with a joke. But more importantly, I learned how to stop disappearing for other people's comfort. In the months that followed, I built a new routine. I joined a woodworking class at the community center. Started volunteering once a week at a local food pantry. I reconnected with my sister, who I hadn't seen much during the marriage because Carla never made her feel welcome. I even started dating again. Nothing serious, just quiet dinners and honest conversation with women who didn't expect anything more than my company. It was strange, learning how to be seen without being needed. But it was also healing. One evening, while sorting through some old boxes, I found a photo of me and Carla from our second anniversary. We were laughing, arms around each other, drinks in hand. Back when it still felt like we were building something real. I stared at that picture for a long time. Then I put it in a drawer, not because I wanted to forget, but because I wanted to remember that even good beginnings don't always lead to good endings. And that's okay. I don't hate them. Not Mariah. Not Taylor. Not even Carla. But I don't owe them anything anymore. Not my money. Not my time. Not my silence. And that, finally, is enough. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more powerful, real-life narratives about family, boundaries, and personal growth. Your support helps us share more stories that matter. See you soon in the next one.